Hello, Year 8. Welcome to your history lesson. If you haven't done this to now already, please can you answer these two questions? What were the problems with having a wall that divides a city, and which country, or we could say which bloc, would most want to tear the wall down and why? Make sure that you've got your title and date, please. And if you haven't done this already, the teacher will give you just 5 minutes to do so. Okay, so we spoke about problems dividing a city in the first lesson. Not seeing your family, your friends, interruption to your job, your school life, your education, all sorts of different things, logistics as well, your food supplies, your transportation, so many things are disrupted. And in terms of which country would most want to tear this wall down, well, since the communists built this wall in the first place, maybe you could argue the West wants to tear this wall down. But at the same time, you could say maybe the communists want to tear the wall down so they can escape. I think you could argue both ways. However, today we are going to look at the international response to the building of the Berlin Wall. So, most famously, I suppose, America and its president at the time, in 1963, John F. Kennedy, made very loud protests against the wall. I'd like the teacher to just take this link and look up the video on YouTube. It's called John F. Kennedy's Speech in Berlin, and go to 6 minutes 50 and listen until 9 minutes to hear what JFK had to say about the wall. Teacher, if this doesn't work or if this is difficult to do, I have got the speech written down here. I'd like all of the students, please, to answer these three questions. What's John F. Kennedy's message? What's his problem with the wall? And how do you know that he wants to tear the wall down? And to go a little bit further, could you answer what impact will the protests have against the wall? What impact will these protests have? The USA, remember, at this time is the most powerful country in the world, arguably, and it is at the head of the protests. So here's the speech in case that video doesn't work. JFK says, "The wall is an offense against humanity, separating families, dividing husbands and wives and brothers and sisters, and dividing a people who wish to be joined together. Peace cannot be achieved unless all German people have freedom. So let me ask you as I close to lift your eyes beyond the dangers of today to the hopes of tomorrow, to the advance of freedom everywhere beyond the wall, to the day of peace with justice. Freedom is every man's right, and when all men are free, then we can look forward to that day when this city will be joined as one." If the video didn't work, just take a moment to reread that speech or the sections from the speech and answer those three questions. What's JFK's message? What's his problem with the wall? How do you know he wants to tear it down? Okay, so his message is pretty clear. He desires peace, but only with freedom, only if Germany is united. And his problem with the wall is that it divides Germany and stops true peace and freedom from happening, in his opinion. And we know that he wants to tear the wall down because he talks about how it divides people who wish to be joined together, and he talks about how freedom can only happen. Peace can only happen when there is freedom beyond the wall, and This is not explicit. He doesn't say this outright. He hates the wall and he wants it torn down. But he talks about how peace can only happen, freedom can only happen when people are unified. And the impact, you've got to think, the impact of the most powerful nation in the world saying this speech, making this speech in Berlin, right in front of the wall, is going to be massive. If you are able to watch the speech or hear the speech, it's going to make a huge impression. It shows that America is ready to take action against the wall. And they are not silent about it. This is 2 years since the wall is built, and the president of the United States, the most powerful country in the world, comes to West Berlin in the middle of communist East Germany to make this speech about freedom and peace. It's aggressive without being aggressive. He is being strong without being overly aggressive. Okay. So this is going to make a huge impact on politics in the world. And at the time, America wasn't acting alone. At the same time, the United Nations were protesting the wall as well. The United Nations is a group that was created in 1945 to prevent war happening again. Dozens and dozens of countries joined up because of the horror of the Second World War. They all signed up to help each other, to listen to each other in order to stop war happening again. Even the USSR was a part of the UN, even though it had totally different ideas and politics to the Western countries that were a part of the UN. And it still survives today. The UN worked hard to be a mediator, to be a place where everyone can talk to each other. And it has various different branches that look after various different problems in the world. If a country has a dispute with another country, they often go to the UN to find a way to resolve it. So I want you to write down now, under the subtitle, the United Nations protests, write down what the United Nations is, copy that description, and answer these 2 questions. What would the UN, this peacekeeping body, think of the Berlin Wall? And if you think the UN would want to tear it down, why would the UN want to tear it down? Peacekeeping international group. Can you answer those 2 questions now, please? So the UN obviously would want to tear down the wall in order to enable people to cohabit peacefully without this threat, without being divided, without being forcefully divided. So the UN would very much be against the wall. And the impact of the protests internationally, well, it's for you to judge. On the one hand, they were ineffective. The Berlin Wall remained for 28 years, from 1961 to 1989. So in one sense, you could say this huge speech that JFK made in 63 had no impact, you could say. However, in the Cold War context, these 2 sides facing off, capitalist versus communist, it made the USSR and communism look worse than the USA and capitalism, which may make more countries back then and individuals ally with the USA and capitalism. When people could see that communists were trying to keep people in rather than running away, and when people could see and heard stories about the deprivation, the hardship of being in communist countries at the time, it obviously would make people feel maybe more sympathetic to capitalism and the West rather than the communists. So there's 2 different sides to the impact of these protests, whether they're effective or not. Can you write down two sentences about how effective the protests were. On the one hand, the protests by the UN and the USA were ineffective. You know this because the wall remained for 28 years. On the other hand, the protests by the UN and the USA were effective. And you know this because there was more support for the USA and the UN, and eventually that wall did come down. Okay, so can you just spend 4 minutes maximum, 2 minutes for each sentence? Can you write down your response to that question? Were the protests effective? And teacher, if there is time, please could the student start this task. Imagine that you're on a protest march for tearing the wall down. You're an ally of the USA and the UN. I want you to draw a campaign poster or a placard showing that you want the wall to be pulled down. Okay, very simple end of the lesson for you, doing something a bit more creative. Okay, please do that to the end of the lesson, and I will talk to you soon.